Good evening, ladies. Shalom, peace be unto you all who tune in tonight. Just a quick little study session on Passover and periods. A lot of sisters have questions on whether a woman can attend services during a holy feast or any church or temple services for that matter. I got an echo. If so, if she is permitted or not permitted, what is it that she is able or unable to do while being quote unquote unclean or on her monthly or menses? Um, Other questions: why are women considered unclean when they have their cycle? Is it because she is evil and has to release her evil through her menstrual? Is it because the Most High said so? Is she going to kill the livestock and the crops if she doesn't stay from outside or isn't put away in a hut? And will it drive the community mad or, with her bloody rags, whatever? But we're going to read a couple of articles and a little background history on the menstrual cycle and why people think the way that they do, on the taboos and such. So, the first one I'm going to read is: why can't girls enter temples during menstruation? This is a article from SouthAsianParent.com. A look at major religions of the world shows that, without exception, they have placed restrictions on menstruating women. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism have all made statements about menstruation and its negative effect on women, leading to prohibitions about physical intimacy, cooking, attending places of worship, and sometimes requiring women to live separately from men at this time. The practice: in pre-Christian centuries, women were considered to be quote unquote impure during their menstruation, and in some cultures, for example, Huaulu of Indonesia, they were confined to special menstrual huts. Moreover, menstruating women were believed to be dangerous in early Western societies, and social restrictions were placed upon them. In fact, the British Medical Journal in 1878 claimed that a menstruating woman could cause bacon to putrefy. Interesting. As recently as 25 years ago, it was reported that farmers in Eastern and Central Europe believed women during their periods should not bake bread or churn butter. Most Christian denominations do not specify rituals or rules related to menstruation, but the Eastern Orthodox Church does advise women not to receive communion during this time. The Quran forbids intercourse during menstruation, and women are excused from prayers and fasting. They are also restricted from entering the mosque. In Sikhism, Guru Nanak condemned the practice of treating menstruating women as impure and felt that it should not prevent her from wanting to pray or accomplishing her religious duties. In Hinduism, the first menstruation of a young girl is a cause for celebration, with special presents given. However, menstrual blood has generally been considered impure. At my grandmother's house, women were not permitted to cook in the kitchen, had different utensils, ate and slept separately. They were also not allowed to enter the prayer room. Nonetheless, when as a 12-year-old girl, I visited my grandparents during the summer holidays, my loving and pragmatic grandmother spared me this embarrassment by asking me not to tell anyone about my periods. Swami Mayanada explained this practice in physiological, hormonal, and emotional terms. Earlier, the traditional role of a woman in the house involved arduous and physically demanding tasks such as carrying heavy pots of water, grinding of wheat, dals, rice, and masalas, farming duties, and so on. During periods, women suffer in varying degrees from discomfort to cramps and headaches to PMS syndrome, which includes depression, anger, and mood swings. Thus, they were prescribed rest during the 3 days of menstruation. However, the only way this could actually be enforced was to put a religious taboo on it and exempt women from all household tasks. In fact, in Orthodox homes in India, men who would otherwise not lift a finger to help at home actually do all the cooking. Prayer, a personal relationship with God. A few weeks ago, I discussed this topic with Swamini Bimalandaji, a senior and highly respected Swamini of the Shemyaya mission. She emphatically stated there was no need to feel any guilt in doing one's chanting and prayers at the altar of one's home. There was absolutely no sin incurred. However, since a large number of people in India are still strict believers, one should, as respect to their beliefs, refrain from entering public places of worship. And the next one is going to be on culture and menstruation. So, culture and menstruation is about cultural aspects surrounding how societies view menstruation. A menstrual taboo is any social taboo concerned with menstruation. In some societies, it involves menstruation being perceived as unclean or embarrassing, inhibiting even the mention of menstruation, whether in public, in the media and advertising, or in private among friends in the household or with men. Many traditional religions consider menstruation ritually unclean. Although anthropologists point out that the concepts sacred and unclean may be intimately connected. Different cultures view menstruation in different ways. The basis of many conduct norms and communication about menstruation in Western industrial societies is the belief that menstruation should remain hidden. By contrast, in some hunter gatherer societies, menstrual observances are viewed in a positive light without any connotation of an uncleanness. Mythology. The word menstruation is etymologically related to moon. The terms menstruation and menses are derived from the Latin mensis, month, which in turn relates to the Greek mene or moon, and to the roots of the English words month and moon. According to anthropologists Thomas Buckley and Alma Gottlieb, cross-cultural study shows that while taboos and about menstruation are nearly universal, and while many of these involve notions of uncleanliness, numerous menstrual traditions bespeak quite different, even opposite purposes and meanings. In some traditional societies, menstrual rituals are experienced by women as protective and empowering, offering women a space set apart from the male gaze and from unwanted sexual or domestic pressures and demands. An instructive example is provided by the anthropologist Maggie, who describes the communal Bashali, large menstrual house of women in the Kalasha Valley, northwestern Pakistan, as their most holy place, respected by men and serving as women's all female organizing center for establishing and maintaining gender solidarity and power. According to one body of cultural evolutionary scholarship, the idea that menstrual blood marks the body as periodically sacred was initially established by female coalitions in their own interests. Although later, with the rise of cattle ownership and patriarchal power, these same beliefs and taboos were harnessed by religious patriarchs to intensify women's oppression. The metaformic theory, as proposed by cultural theorist Judy Grahn and others, places menstruation as a central organizing idea in the creation of culture and the formation of humans' earliest rituals. Synchronization with the moon. Menstruation in synchrony with the moon is widely assumed in myths and traditions as a ritual ideal. The idea that menstruation is or ideally ought to be in harmony with wider cosmic rhythms is one of the most tenacious ideas central to the myths and rituals of traditional communities across the world. One of the most thoroughgoing analysis of primitive mythology ever undertaken was that of the French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, who concluded that, taken together, the indigenous myths of North and South America expressed men's worry that unless women's periods were carefully monitored and synchronized, the universe might descend into chaos. In Aboriginal Australia, the supernatural being known as the rainbow snake has been interpreted as, among other things, an indigenous way of conceptualizing the ideal of synchronized tidal, lunar, menstrual, and seasonal periodicities whose overall harmony, it is believed, confers spiritual power and fertility. To many, such cultural associations appear persuasive in view of the fact that in humans, the menstrual cycle quite closely approximates the moon's 29 and a half day synodic cycle. Unlike in chimpanzees, 36 days, or bonobos, 40 days, bonobos, statistical information from hunter gatherers is lacking, but where large scale Western studies focus on women's peak reproductive years, removing outlier values, the cycle length gravitates around 29.1 to 29 and a half days, while the figure for women in their 30s shortens toward 28 days. In no current human population has statistically significant lunar phase locking been demonstrated. Sacred and powerful. In some historic cultures, a menstruating woman was considered sacred and powerful, with increased psychic abilities and strong enough to heal the sick. According to the Cherokee, menstrual blood was a source of feminine strength and had the power to destroy enemies. In ancient Rome, Pliny the Elder wrote that a menstruating woman who uncovers her body can scare away hailstorms, whirlstorms, and lightning. If she strips naked and walks around the field, caterpillars, worms, and beetles fall off the ears of corn. Menstrual blood is viewed as especially dangerous to men's power. In Africa, menstrual blood is used in the most powerful magic charms in order to both purify and destroy. Mayan mythology explains the origin of menstruation as a punishment for violating the social rules governing marital alliance. The menstrual blood turns into snakes and insects used in black sorcery before the Maya moon goddess is reborn from it. Where women's blood is considered sacred, the belief is that it should be ritually set apart. According to this logic, it is when sacred blood comes into contact with profane things that it becomes experienced as ritually dangerous or quote unquote unclean. Menstruating women have also been believed to be dangerous. Religious views. The sociological theorist Emil Durkheim argued that human religion in its entirety emerged originally in connection with menstruation. His argument was that a certain kind of action, a collective ritual action, could establish simultaneously totemism, law, exogamy, and kinship, in addition to distinctively human language and thought. Everything began, according to Durkheim, when a flow of blood periodically ruptured relations between the sexes. All blood is terrible, he observed, and all sorts of taboos are instituted to prevent contact with it. During menstruation, females would exercise a type of repulsing action which keeps the other sex far from them. This same blood was thought to run through the veins of women and animals alike, suggesting the blood's ultimate origin in totemic, part human, part animal, ancestral beings. Once menstrual blood had been linked with the blood of the hunt, it became logically possible for a hunter to respect certain animals as if they were his kin, this being the essence of totemism. Within the group's shared blood resided its god or totem, from which it follows that the blood is a divine thing. When it runs out, the god is spilling over. In Judaism, the niddah, a woman during menstruation is called niddah and may be banned from certain actions. For example, the Jewish Torah prohibits sexual intercourse with a menstruating woman. The ritual exclusion of niddah applies to a woman while menstruating and for about a week thereafter, until she immerses herself in a mikvah or ritual bath, which is basically intended only for married women. During this time, a married couple must avoid sexual intercourse and physical intimacy for 2 weeks. Orthodox Judaism forbids women and men from even touching or passing things to each other during this period. While Orthodox Jews follow this exclusion, many Jews in other branches of the religion do not. In the Torah, Leviticus 15:19 through 30, a menstruating female is considered ritually unclean. Anyone who touches her will be unclean until evening. Touching a menstruating female, touching an object she had sat on or lain on, or having intercourse with her also makes a person ritually unclean. The extent to which these rules are observed in modern Judaism varies depending on the degree of conservatism or orthodoxy. In Genesis 31, 34 through 35, menstruation is referenced in a story where Rachel was or pretended to be in her menstrual period. Now Rachel had taken the teraphim and put them in the saddle of the camel and sat upon them. And Laban felt about all the tent, but found them not. And she said to her father, let not my Lord be angry that I cannot rise up before thee, for the manner of women is upon me. And he searched, but found not the teraphim. In Christianity, churching of women, most Christian denominations do not follow any specific rituals or rules related to menstruation. Other denominations, such as those of Oriental Orthodox Christianity, follow the rules similar to those laid out in the Holiness Code section of Leviticus, somewhat similar to the Jewish ritual of niddah. Pope Dionysius of Alexandria held with regard to menstruating women that, quote, not even themselves being faithful and pious would dare when in this state either to approach the holy table or to touch the body and blood of Christ, unquote. As such, Oriental Orthodox Christian women, such as those belonging to the Coptic Orthodox Church, do not attend church while they are menstruating. Some church fathers defended the exclusion of women from ministry based on a notion of uncleanness. Others held that purity laws should be discarded as part of the Old Covenant. The 4th century text, Apostolic Constitution, says, "For neither lawful mixture, nor childbearing, nor the menstrual purgation, nor nocturnal pollution can defile the nature of a man, or separate the Holy Spirit from him. Nothing but impiety and unlawful practice can do that." Some Christian churches, including many authorities of the Eastern Orthodox Church and some parts of the Oriental Orthodox Church, also known as the Russian, Ukrainian, Greek, and Indian Orthodox Church, distinct from the Roman Catholic Church, advise women not to receive communion during their menstrual period. Not because menstruation is considered to be sinful, but for the more intense preparation to approach Christ. This is a fairly common practice throughout Greece and Russia and other historically Orthodox Christian countries, as well as by Orthodox Christians in countries where they are in the minority, including Egypt, India, and Syria. In 735, the Latin Church decided that women must be allowed to attend liturgies and receive Holy Communion during their menstruation. Islam. From the article Islamic Hygienical Jurisprudence. During menstrual periods, women are excused from performing prayers. Sets of rules are advised for women to follow while during menstruation. They should not fast, and leftover fasts of Ramadan are to be completed during other days. During menses, pilgrimages are allowed, and circumambulation of the Kaaba is also permitted. They are permitted to enter the praying place of the mosque, but are excused from prayer and are encouraged to be present at Muslims' gatherings and festivals. After the period, a bath, ghusl, which is also required of both partners after sex, is also required before prayer may continue. And they ask you about menstruation, say it is harm. So keep away from women during menstruation and do not approach them until they become pure. And when they have purified themselves, then come to them from where Allah has ordained for you. Indeed, Allah loves those who are constantly repentant and loves those who purify themselves. Your women are your filth or your tilth. So come to your tilth as you wish, and put forth for yourselves, and fear Allah, and know that you will meet him, and give good tidings to the believers. That's from the Quran. The traditional Islamic interpretation of the Quran forbids intercourse during a woman's menstrual period, but allows for physical intimacy and other sexual acts that are not intercourse. If a man is engaged in sexual intercourse with his wife and discovers that her period has started, he must immediately withdraw. On authority of Urwa, a person asked me, "Can a woman in menses serve me? And can a junub woman come close to me?" I replied, "All this is easy for me. All of them can serve me, and there is no harm for any other person to do the same." Aisha told me that she used to comb the hair of Allah's apostle while she was in her menses, and he was in itikaf, or in the mosque. He would bring his head near her in her room, and she would comb his hair while she used to be in her menses. In Buddhism, Theravada or Hinayana, menstruation is viewed as a natural physical excretion that women have to go through on a monthly basis, nothing more or less. However, in certain branches of Japanese Buddhism, menstruating women are banned from attending temples. In Nichiren Buddhism in Japan, menstruation is not considered a spiritual obstacle to religious practice, although a menstruating woman may choose not to bow for comfort. Hinduism's views on menstruation are diverse. Menstruation is seen as a period of purification, and women are often separated from place of worship or any object pertaining to it for the length of her period. This forms the basis of most of the cultural practices and restrictions around menstruation in Hinduism. Women of mature age have been restricted from entering Sabha Ramallah, traditionally as recorded in memoir of the Survey of Travancore and Caution States in 1818. In 1991, the Karaya High Court legally restricted entry of women above the age of 10 and below the age of 50 from Sabha Ramallah Shrine as they were of the menstruating age. On 28 September 2018, the Supreme Court of India lifted the ban on the entry of women. It said that discrimination against women on any grounds, even religious, is unconstitutional. Controversy regarding this continues. Okay, and in Chinese belief systems, women are not supposed to touch sacred statues, make offerings, or pray to sacred statues on their menstrual cycle. Before the revolution, some temples only permitted men and women who were very old or very young to attend. Wicca and paganism. Menstruation is mentioned in some Wiccan and pagan texts. There are collected books and material on witchcraft and menstruation at the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. In the 2010s, public Wiccan and pagan practitioners began sharing rituals, spells, and histories of menstruation in these belief systems. Pagan rituals and histories of menstruation is also discussed in books such as Penelope Shuttle and Peter Redgrove's The Wise Womb, Menstruation and Every Woman. Okay, and with that, I'm going to go to my book. Which I will put in the description box later. This is called The Golden Bough. And I am reading The Seclusion of Girls at Puberty. Now, it is remarkable that the foregoing two rules, not to touch the ground and not to see the sun, are observed either separately or conjointly by girls at puberty in many parts of the world. Thus, among the Negroes of Loango, girls at puberty are confined in separate huts, and they may not touch the ground with any part of their bare body. Among the Zulus and kindred tribes of South Africa, when the first signs of puberty show themselves, while a girl is walking, gathering wood, or working in the field, she runs to the river and hides herself among the reeds for the day so as not to be seen by men. She covers her head carefully with her blanket that the sun may not shine on it and shrivel her up into a withered skeleton, as would result from exposure to the sun's beams. After dark, she returns to her home and is secluded in a hut for some time. With the Awankande, a tribe at the northern end of Lake Nyasa, it is a rule that after her first menstruation, a girl must be kept apart with a few companions of her own sex in a darkened house. The floor is covered with dry banana leaves, but no fire may be lit in the house, which is called the house of the Awasungu, that is, of maidens who have no hearts. In New Ireland, girls are confined for 4 or 5 years in small cages, being kept in the dark and not allowed to set foot on the ground. The custom has been thus described by an eyewitness. I heard from a teacher about some strange custom connected with some of the young girls here, so I asked the chief to take me to the house where they were. The house was about 25 feet in length and stood in a reed and bamboo enclosure, across the entrance to which a bundle of dried grass was suspended to show that it was a strictly taboo. Inside the house were three conical structures about 7 or 8 feet in height and about 10 or 12 feet in circumference at the bottom, and for about 4 feet from the ground, at which point they tapered off to a point at the top. These cages were made of the broad leaves of the pandanus tree, sewn quite close together so that no light and little or no air could enter. On one side of each is an opening which is closed by a double door of plaited coconut tree and pandanus tree leaves. About 3 feet from the ground, there is a stage of bamboos which forms the floor. In each of these cages, we were told, there was a young woman confined, each of whom had to remain for at least 4 or 5 years without ever being allowed to go outside the house. I could scarcely credit the story when I heard it. The whole thing seemed too horrible to be true. I spoke to the chief and told him that I wished to see the inside of the cages and also to see the girls, that I might make them a present of a few beads. He told me that it was taboo or forbidden for any men but their own relations to look at them. But I suppose the promised beads acted as an inducement, and so he sent away for some old lady who had charge and who alone is allowed to open the doors. While we were waiting, we could hear the girls talking to the chief in a querulous way, as if objecting to something or expressing their fears. The old woman came at length, and certainly she did not seem a very pleasant jailer or guardian, nor did she seem to favor the request of the chief to allow us to see the girls, as she regarded us with anything but pleasant looks. However, she had to undo the door when the chief told her to do so. And then the girls peeped out at us, and when told to do so, they held out their hands for the beads. I, however, purposely sat at some distance away and merely held out the beads to them, as I wished to draw them quite outside that I might inspect the inside of the cages. This desire of mine gave rise to another difficulty, as these girls were not allowed to put their feet to the ground all the time they were confined in these places. However, they wished to get the beads, and so the old lady had to go outside and collect a lot of pieces of wood and bamboo, which she placed on the ground. And then, going to one of the girls, she helped her down and held her hand as she stepped from one piece of wood to another until she came near enough to get the beads I held out to her. I then went to inspect the inside of the cage out of which she came, but could scarcely put my head inside of it. The atmosphere was so hot and stifling. It was clean and contained nothing but a few short lengths of bamboo for holding water. There was only room for the girl to sit or lie down in a crouched position on the bamboo platform. And when the doors are shut, it must be nearly or quite dark inside. The girls are never allowed to come out except once a day to bathe in a dish or wooden bowl placed close to each cage. They say that they perspire profusely. They are placed in these stifling cages when quite young and must remain there until they are young women, when they are taken out and have each a great marriage feast provided for them. One of them was about 14 or 15 years old, and the chief told us that she had been there for 5 years, but would soon be taken out now. The other two were about 8 and 10 years old, and they have to stay there for several years longer. In Kabati, a district of British New Guinea, daughters of chiefs, when they are about 12 or 13 years of age, are kept indoors for 2 or 3 years, never being allowed under any pretense to descend from the house, and the house is so shaded that the sun cannot shine on them. Among the Yabim and Bukawa, two neighboring and kindred tribes on the coast of northern New Guinea, A girl at puberty is secluded for some 5 or 6 weeks in an inner part of the house, but she may not sit on the floor, lest her uncleanliness should cleave to it. So a log of wood is placed for her to squat on. Moreover, she may not touch the ground with her feet. Hence, if she is obliged to quit the house for a short time, she is muffled up in mats and walks on 2 halves of a coconut shell, which are fastened like sandals to her feet by creeping plants. Among the Danums of Borneo, girls at the age of 8 or 10 years are shut up in a little room or cell of the house and cut off from all intercourse with the world for a long time. The cell, like the rest of the house, is raised on piles above the ground and is lit by a single small window opening on a lonely place, so that the girl is in almost total darkness. She may not leave the room on any pretext whatever, not even for the most necessary purposes. None of her family may see her all the time she is shut up, but a single slave woman is appointed to wait on her. During her lonely confinement, which often lasts 7 years, the girl occupies herself in weaving mats or with other handiwork. Her bodily growth is stunted by the long want of exercise, and when, on attaining womanhood, she is brought out, her complexion is pale and wax-like. She is now shown the sun, the earth, the water, the trees, and the flowers, as if she were newly born. Then a great feast is made, a slave is killed, and the girl is smeared with his blood. In Karam, girls at puberty were formerly shut up by themselves in a hut which was kept dark. In Yap, one of the Caroline Islands, should a girl be overtaken by her first menstruation on the public road, she may not sit down on the earth, but must beg for a coconut shell to put under her. She is shut up for several days in a small hut at a distance from her parents' house, and afterwards she is bound to sleep for 100 days in one of the special houses which are provided for the use of menstruous women. In the island of Mabuag, Torres Straits, when the signs of puberty appear on a girl, a circle of bushes is made in a dark corner of the house. Here, decked with shoulder belts, armlets, leglets just below the knees, and anklets, wearing a chaplet on her head and shell ornaments in her ears, on her chest, and on her back, she squats in the midst of the bushes, which are piled so high round about her that only her head is visible. In this state of seclusion, she must remain for 3 months. All this time, the sun may not shine upon her, but at night she is allowed to slip out of the hut, and the bushes that hedge her in are then changed. She may not feed herself or handle food, but is fed by 1 or 2 old women, her maternal aunts, who are especially appointed to look after her. One of these women cooks food for her at a special fire in the forest. The girl is forbidden to eat turtle or turtle eggs during the season when the turtles are breeding, but no vegetable food is refused her. No man, not even her own father, may come into the house while her seclusion lasts. For if her father saw her at this time, he would certainly have bad luck in his fishing, and would probably smash his canoe the very next time he went out into it. At the end of the 3 months, she is carried down to a freshwater creek by her attendants, hanging onto their shoulders in such a way that her feet do not touch the ground, while the women of the tribe form a ring around her, and thus escort her to the beach. Arrived at the shore, she is stripped of her ornaments, and the bearers stagger with her into the creek, where they immerse her, and all the other women join in, splashing water over both the girl and her bearers. When they come out of the water, one of the 2 attendants makes a heap of grass for her charge to squat upon. The other runs to the reef, catches a small crab, tears off its claws, and hastens back with it to the creek. Here in the meantime, a fire has been kindled, and the claws are roasted at it. The girl is then fed by her attendants with the roasted claws. After that, she is freshly decorated, and the whole party marches back to the village in a single rank, the girl walking in the center between her two old aunts who hold her by the wrist. The husbands of her aunts now receive her and lead her into the house of one of them, where all partake of food, and the girl is allowed once more to feed herself in the usual manner. A dance follows in which the girl takes a prominent part, dancing between the husbands of the two aunts who had charge of her in her retirement. Among the Yarrakana tribe of Cape York Peninsula in northern Queensland, a girl at puberty is said to live by herself for a month or 6 weeks. No man may see her, though any woman may. She stays in a hut or shelter specially made for her, on the floor of which she lies supine. She may not see the sun, and towards sunset she must keep her eyes shut until the sun has gone down. Otherwise, it is thought that her nose will be diseased. During her seclusion, she may not eat nothing that lives in salt water, or a snake would kill her. An old woman waits upon her and supplies her with roots, yams, and water. Some Australian tribes are wont to bury their girls at such seasons, more or less deeply in the ground, perhaps in order to hide them from the light of the sun. Among the Indians of California, a girl at her first menstruation was thought to be possessed of a particular degree of supernatural power. And this was not always regarded as entirely defiling or malevolent. Often, however, there was a strong feeling of the power of evil inherent in her condition. Not only was she secluded from her family and the community, but an attempt was made to seclude the world from her. One of the injunctions most strongly laid upon her was not to look about her. She kept her head bowed and was forbidden to see the world and the sun. Some tribes covered her with a blanket. Many of the customs in this connection resembled those of the North Pacific coast most strongly, such as the prohibition to the girl to touch or scratch her head with her hand, a special implement being furnished her for the purpose. Sometimes she could eat only when fed, and in other cases, fasted altogether. Among the Chinook Indians who inhabited the coast of Washington state, when a chief's daughter attained to puberty, she was hidden for 5 days from the view of the people. She might not look at them, nor at the sky, nor might she pick berries. It was believed that if she were to look at the sky, the weather would be bad, that if she picked berries, it would rain, and that when she hung her towel of cedar bark on a spruce tree, the tree withered up at once. She went out of the house by a separate door and bathed in a creek far from the village. She fasted for some days, and for many days more she might not eat fresh food. Amongst the Ot or Nootka Indians of Vancouver Island, when girls reach puberty, they are placed in a sort of gallery in the house and are there surrounded completely with mats, so that neither the sun nor any fire can be seen. In this cage, they remain for several days. Water is given them, but no food. The longer a girl remains in this retirement, the greater honor is it to the parents. But she is disgraced for life if it is known that she has seen fire or the sun during this initiatory ordeal. Pictures of the mythical Thunderbird are painted on the screens behind which she hides. During her seclusion, she may neither move nor lie down, but must always sit in a squatting posture. She may not touch her hair with her hands, but is allowed to scratch her head with a comb or a piece of bone provided for the purpose. To scratch her body is also forbidden, as it is believed that every scratch would leave a scar. For 8 months after reaching maturity, she may not eat any fresh food, particularly salmon. Moreover, she must eat by herself and use a cup and dish of her own. In the Setsuat tribe of British Columbia, a girl at puberty wears a large hat of skin which comes down over her face and screens it from the sun. It is believed that if she were to expose her face to the sun or to the sky, rain would fall. The hat protects her face also against the fire, which ought not to strike her skin. To shield her hands, she wears mittens. In her mouth, she carries the tooth of an animal to prevent her own teeth from becoming hollow. For a whole year, she may not see blood unless her face is blackened. Otherwise, she would grow blind. For 2 years, she wears the hat and lives in a hut by herself, although she is allowed to see other people. At the end of 2 years, a man takes the hat from her head and throws it away. In the Bilkula or Bella Kula tribe of British Columbia, when a girl attains puberty, she must stay in the shed, which serves as her bedroom, where she has a separate fireplace. She is not allowed to descend to the main part of the house and may not sit by the fire of the family. For 4 days, she is bound to remain motionless in a sitting posture. She fasts during the day, but is allowed a little food and drink very early in the morning. After the 4 days' seclusion, she may leave her room, but only through a separate opening cut in the floor, for the houses are raised on piles. She may not yet come into the chief room. In leaving the house, she wears a large hat, which protects her face against the rays of the sun. It is believed that if the sun were to shine on her face, her eyes would suffer. She may pick berries on the hills, but may not come near the river or sea for a whole year. Were she to eat fresh salmon, she would lose her senses, or her mouth would be changed into a long beak. Amongst the Tlingit or Thingkeet or Kolosh Indians of Alaska, when a girl showed signs of womanhood, she used to be confined to a little hut or cage, which was completely blocked up with the exception of a small air hole. In this dark and filthy abode, she had to remain a year without fire, exercise, or associates. Only her mother and a female slave might supply her with nourishment. Her food was put in a little window. She had to drink out of the wing bone of a white-headed eagle. The time of her seclusion was afterwards reduced in some places to 6 or 3 months or even less. She had to wear a sort of hat with long flaps, that her gaze might not pollute the sky. For she was thought unfit for the sun to shine upon, and it was imagined that her look would destroy the luck of a hunter, fisher, or gambler, turn things to stone, and do other mischief. At the end of her confinement, her old clothes were burnt, new ones were made, and a feast was given, at which a slit was cut in her upper lip parallel to the mouth, and a piece of wood or shell was inserted to keep the aperture open. Among the Kaniags, an Esquimau people of Alaska, a girl at puberty was placed in a small hut in which she had to remain on her hands and feet for 6 months. Then the hut was enlarged a little so as to allow her to straighten her back, but in this posture she had to remain for 6 months more. All this time she was regarded as an unclean being with whom no one might hold intercourse. When symptoms of puberty appeared on a girl for the first time, the Guaranis of southern Brazil on the borders of Paraguay used to sew her up in her hammock, leaving only a small opening in it to allow her to breathe. In this condition, wrapped up and shrouded like a corpse, she was kept for 2 or 3 days or so long as the symptoms lasted, and during this time, she had to observe a most rigorous fast. After that, she was entrusted to a matron who cut the girl's hair and enjoined her to abstain most strictly from eating flesh of any kind until her hair should be grown long enough to hide her ears. In similar circumstances, the Chiriguanos of southeastern Bolivia hoisted the girl in her hammock to the roof, where she stayed for a month. The second month, the hammock was let halfway down from the roof, and in the third month, old women armed with sticks entered the hut and ran about striking everything they met, saying they were hunting the snake that had wounded the girl. Among the Matakas or Matagayos, an Indian tribe of the Gran Chaco, a girl at puberty has to remain in seclusion for some time. She lies covered up with branches or other things in a corner of the hut, seeing no one and speaking to no one. And during this time, she may eat neither flesh nor fish. Meantime, a man beats a drum in front of the house. Among the Urucares, an India tribe of eastern Bolivia, when a girl perceives the signs of puberty, her father constructs a little hut of palm leaves near the house. In this cabin, he shuts up his daughter so that she cannot see the light, and there she remains fasting rigorously for 4 days. Amongst the Macassas of British Guiana, when a girl shows the first signs of puberty, she is hung in a hammock at the highest point of the hut. For the first few days, she may not leave the hammock by day, but at night she must come down, light a fire, and spend the night beside it. Else, she would break out in sores on her neck, throat, and other parts of her body. So long as the symptoms are at their height, she must fast rigorously. When they have abated, she may come down and take up her abode in a little compartment that is made for her in the darkest corner of the hut. In the morning, she may cook her food, but it must be at a separate fire and in a vessel of her own. After about 10 days, the magician comes and undoes the spell by muttering charms and breathing on her and on the more valuable of the things with which she has come in contact. The pots and drinking vessels which she used are broken and the fragments buried. After her first bath, the girl must submit to be beaten by her mother with thin rods without uttering a cry. At the end of the second period, she is again beaten, but not afterwards. She is now considered clean and can mix again with people. Other Indians of Guyana, after keeping the girl in her hammock at the top of the hut for a month, expose her to certain large ants, whose bite is very painful. Sometimes, in addition to being stung with ants, the sufferer has to fast day and night so long as she remains slung up on high in her hammock, so that when she comes down, she is reduced to a skeleton. When a Hindu maiden reaches maturity, she is kept in a dark room for 4 days and is forbidden to see the sun. She is regarded as unclean. No one may touch her. Her diet is restricted to boiled rice, milk, sugar, curd, and tamarind without salt. On the morning of the fifth day, she goes to a neighboring tank accompanied by 5 women whose husbands are alive. Smeared with turmeric water, they all bathe and return home, throwing away the mat and other things that were in the room. The Rari Brahmins of Bengal compel a girl at puberty to live alone and do not allow her to see the face of any male. For 3 days, she remains shut up in a dark room and has to undergo certain penances. Fish, flesh, and sweet meats are forbidden her. She must live upon rice and ghee. Among the Tians of Malabar, a girl is thought to be polluted for 4 days from the beginning of her first menstruation. During this time, she must keep to the north side of the house, where she sleeps on a grass mat of a particular kind in a room festooned with garlands of young coconut leaves. Another girl keeps her company and sleeps with her, but she may not touch any other person, tree, or plant. Further, she may not see the sky, and woe betide her if she catches sight of a crow or a cat. Her diet must be strictly vegetarian, without salt, tamarinds, or chilies. She is armed against evil spirits by a knife, which is placed on the mat or carried on her person. In Cambodia, a girl at puberty is put to bed under a mosquito curtain, where she should stay 100 days. Usually, however, 4, 5, 10, or 20 days are thought enough. And even this, in a hot climate and under the close meshes of the curtain, is sufficiently trying. According to another account, a Cambodian maiden at puberty is said to enter into the shade during her retirement, which, according to the rank and position of her family, may last any time from a few days to several years. She has to observe a number of rules, such as not to be seen by a strange man, not to eat flesh or fish, and so on. She goes nowhere, not even to the pagoda. But this state of seclusion is discontinued during eclipses. At such times, she goes forth and pays her devotions to the monster who is supposed to call eclipses by catching the heavenly bodies between his teeth. This permission to break her rule of retirement and appear abroad during an eclipse seems to show how literally the injunction is interpreted, which forbids maidens entering on womanhood to look upon the sun. A superstition so widely diffused as this might be expected to leave traces in legends and folk tales, and it has done so. The old Greek story of Danae, who was confined by her father in a subterranean chamber or a brazen tower, but impregnated by Zeus, who reached her in the shape of a shower of gold, perhaps belongs to this class of tales. It has its counterpart in the legend which the Kyrgyz of Siberia tell of their ancestry. A certain Khan had a fair daughter, whom he kept in a dark iron house, that no man might see her. An old woman tended to her, and when the girl was grown to maidenhood, she asked the old woman, "Where do you go? Where do you go so often, my child?" Said the old dame. "There is a bright world. In that bright world, your father and mother live, and all sorts of people live there." "That is where I go," the maiden said. "Good mother, I will tell nobody, but show me that bright world." So the old woman took the girl out of the iron house, but when she saw the bright world, the girl tottered and fainted, and the eye of God fell upon her, and she conceived. Her angry father put her in a golden chest and sent her floating away. Fairy gold can float in fairyland over the wide sea. The shower of gold in the Greek story and the eye of God in the Kyrgyz legend probably stand for sunlight and the sun. The idea that women may be impregnated by the sun is not uncommon in legends, and there are even traces of it in marriage customs. Reasons for the seclusion of girls at puberty. The motive for the restraints so commonly imposed on girls at puberty is the deeply ingrained dread which primitive man universally entertains of menstruous blood. He fears at all times, but especially on its first appearance, hence the restrictions under which women lie at their first menstruation are usually more stringent than those which they have to observe at any subsequent recurrence of the mysterious flow. Some evidence of the fear and of the customs based on it has been cited in an earlier part of this work, but as the terror, for it is nothing less, which the phenomenon periodically strikes into the mind of the savage, has deeply influenced his life and institutions. It may be well to illustrate the subject with some further examples. Thus, in the encounter Bay tribe of South Australia, there is or used to be a superstition which obliges a woman to separate herself from the camp at the time of her monthly illness. When, if a young man or boy should approach, she calls out, and he immediately makes a circuit to avoid her. If she is neglectful upon this point, she exposes herself to scolding and sometimes to severe beating by her husband or nearest relation. Because the boys are told from their infancy that if they see the blood, they will early become gray headed and their strength will fail prematurely. The Dieri of Central Australia believe that if women at these times were to eat fish or bathe in a river, the fish would all die and the water would dry up. The Arunta of the same region forbid menstruous women to gather the Iriakura bulbs, which form a staple article of diet for both men and women. They think that were a woman to break this rule, the supply of bulbs would fail. In some Australian tribes, the seclusion of menstruous women was even more rigid and was enforced by severer penalties than a scolding or a beating. Thus, there is a regulation relating to camps in the Wakalbura tribe which forbids the women coming into the encampment by the same path as the men. Any violation of this rule would in a large camp be punished with death. The reason for this is the dread with which they regard the menstrual period of women. During such a time, a woman is kept entirely away from the camp, half a mile at least. A woman in such a condition has boughs of some tree of totem tied round her loins and is constantly watched and guarded, for it is thought that should any male be so unfortunate as to see a woman in such a condition, he would die. If such a woman were to let herself be seen by a man, she would probably be put to death. When the woman has recovered, she is painted red and white, her head covered with feathers, and returns to the camp. In Muralug, one of the Torres Strait Islands, a menstruous woman may not eat anything that lives in the sea, else the natives believe that the fisheries would fail. In Galela, to the west of New Guinea, women at their monthly periods may not enter a tobacco field, or the plants would be attacked by disease. The Menak Kumbaras of Sumatra are persuaded that if a woman in her unclean state were to go near a rice field, the crop would be spoiled. The Bushmen of South Africa think that by a glance of a girl's eye at the time when she ought to be kept in strict retirement, men become fixed in whatever positions they happen to occupy with whatever they are holding in their hands and are changed into trees that talk. Very, very interesting. So, cattle rearing tribes of South Africa hold that their cattle would die if the milk were drunk by a menstruous woman, and they fear the same disaster if a drop of her blood were to fall on the ground and the oxen were to pass over it. To prevent such a calamity, women in general, not menstruous women only, are forbidden to enter the cattle enclosure. And more than that, they may not use the ordinary paths in entering the village or in passing from one hut to another. They are obliged to make circuitous tracks at the back of the huts in order to avoid the ground in the middle of the village where the cattle stand or lie down. These women's tracks may be seen at every Caffrey village. Among the Baganda, in like manner, no menstruous woman might drink milk, or come into contact with any milk vessel, and she might not touch anything that belonged to her husband, nor sit on his mat, nor cook his food. If she touched anything of his at such a time, it was deemed equivalent to wishing him dead or to actually working magic for his destruction. Were she to handle any article of his, he would surely fall ill. Were she to touch his weapons, he would certainly be killed in the next battle. Further, the Baganda would not suffer a menstruous woman to visit a well. If she did so, they feared that the water would dry up and that she herself would fall sick and die, unless she confessed her fault and the medicine man made atonement for her. Among the Akikuyu of British East Africa, if a new hut is built in a village and the wife chances to menstruate in it on the day she lights the first fire there, the hut must be broken down and demolished the next day. The woman may on no account sleep a second night in it. There is a curse both on her and on it. According to the Talmud, if a woman at the beginning of her period passes between two men, she thereby kills one of them. Peasants of the Lebanon think that menstruous women are the cause of many misfortunes. Their shadow causes flowers to wither and trees to perish. It even arrests the movements of serpents. If one of them mounts a horse, the animal might die or at least be disabled for a long time. The Gia queries of the Orinoco believe that when a woman has her courses, everything upon which she steps will die, and that if a man treads on the place where she has passed, his legs will immediately swell up. Among the Bribri Indians of Costa Rica, a married woman at her periods uses for plates only banana leaves, which, when she has done with them, she throws away in a sequestered spot. For should a cow find and eat them, the animal would waste away and perish. Also, she drinks only out of a special vessel, because any person who should afterwards drink out of the same vessel would infallibly pine away and die. Among most tribes of North American Indians, the custom was that women in their courses retired from the camp or the village and lived during the time of their uncleanness in special huts or shelters, which were appropriated to their use. There they dwelt apart, eating and sleeping by themselves, warming themselves at their own fires, and strictly abstaining from all communications with men who shunned them just as if they were stricken with the plague. Thus, to take examples, the Creek and kindred Indians of the United States compelled women at menstruation to live in separate huts at some distance from the village. There, the women had to stay at the risk of being surprised and cut off by enemies. It was thought a most horrid and dangerous pollution to go near the women at such times, and the danger extended to enemies who, if they slew the women, had to cleanse themselves from the pollution by means of certain sacred herbs and roots. The Sealis Indians of British Columbia imagined that if a menstruous woman were to step over a bundle of arrows, the arrows would thereby be rendered useless and might even cause the death of their owner. And similarly, that if she passed in front of a hunter who carried a gun, the weapon would never shoot straight again. Among the Chippewas and other Indians of the Hudson Bay Territory, menstruous women are excluded from the camp and take up their abode in huts of branches. They wear long hoods, which effectually conceal the head and breast. They may not touch the household furniture nor any objects used by men, for their touch is supposed to defile them, for that their subsequent use would be followed by certain mischief or misfortune, such as disease or death. They must drink out of a swan's bone. They may not walk on the common paths nor cross the tracks of animals. They are never permitted to walk on the ice of rivers or lakes or near the part where the men are hunting beaver or where a fishing net is set, for fear of averting their success. They are also prohibited at those times from partaking of the head of any animal, and even from walking in or crossing the track where the head of a deer, moose, beaver, and many other animals have lately been carried, either on a sledge or on the back. To be guilty of a violation of this custom is considered as of the greatest importance, because they firmly believe that it would be a means of preventing the hunter from having an equal success in his future excursions. So the Lapps forbid women at menstruation to walk on that part of the shore where the fishers are in the habit of setting out their fish. And the Eskimo of Bering Strait believed that if hunters were to come near women in their courses, they would catch no game. For a like reason, the carrier Indians will not suffer a menstruous woman to cross the tracks of animals. If need be, she is carried over them. They think that if she waded in a stream or a lake, the fish would die. Amongst the civilized nations of Europe, the superstitions which cluster around this mysterious aspect of woman's nature are not less extravagant than those which prevail among savages. In the oldest existing cyclopedia, the Natural History of Pliny, the list of dangers apprehended from menstruation is longer than any furnished by mere barbarians. According to Pliny, the touch of a menstruous woman turned wine to vinegar, blighted crops, killed seeds, blasted gardens, brought down the fruit from trees, dimmed mirrors, blunted razors, rusted iron and brass, especially at the waning of the moon, killed bees or at least drove them from their hives, caused mares to miscarry, and so forth. Similarly, in various parts of Europe, it is still believed that if a woman in her courses enters a brewery, the beer will turn sour. If she touches beer, wine, vinegar, or milk, it will go bad. If she makes jam, it will not keep. If she mounts a mare, it will miscarry. If she touches buds, they will wither. If she climbs a cherry tree, it will die. In Brunswick, people think that if a menstruous woman assists at the killing of a pig, the pork will putrefy. In the Greek island of Kalymnos, a woman at such times may not go to the well to draw water, nor cross a running stream, nor enter the sea. Her presence in a boat is said to raise storms. Thus, the object of secluding women at menstruation is to neutralize the dangerous influences which are supposed to emanate from them at such times. That the danger is believed to be especially great at the first menstruation appears from the unusual precautions taken to isolate girls at this crisis. Two of these precautions have been illustrated above, namely, the rules that the girls may not touch the ground nor see the sun. The general effect of these rules is to keep her suspended, so to say, between heaven and earth. Whether enveloped in her hammock and slung up to the roof, as in South America, or raised above the ground in a dark and narrow cage, as in New Ireland, she may be considered to be out of the way of doing mischief, since being shut off from both the earth and from the sun, she can poison neither of these great sources of life by her deadly contagion. In short, she is rendered harmless by being, in electrical language, insulated. But the precautions thus taken to isolate or insulate the girl are dictated by a regard for her own safety as well as for the safety of others. For it is thought that she herself would suffer if she were to neglect the prescribed regimen. Thus, Zulu girls, as we have seen, believed that they would shrivel to skeletons if the sun were to shine on them at puberty, and the Marxists imagined that if a woman were to transgress the rules, she would suffer from sores on various parts of her body. In short, The girl is viewed as charged with a powerful force, which, if not kept within bounds, may prove destructive both to herself and to all with whom she comes in contact. To repress this force within the limits necessary for the safety of all concerned is the object of the taboos in question. The same explanation applies to the observance of the same rules by divine kings and priests. The uncleanness, as it is called, of girls at puberty and the sanctity of holy men do not, to the primitive mind, differ materially from each other. They are only different manifestations of the same mysterious energy, which, like energy in general, is in itself neither good nor bad, but becomes beneficent or maleficent according to its application. Accordingly, if, like girls at puberty, divine personages may neither touch the ground nor see the sun, the reason is, on the one hand, a fear lest their divinity might, at contact with earth or heaven, discharge itself with fatal violence on either, and on the other hand, an apprehension that the divine being, thus drained of his ethereal virtue, might therefore be incapacitated for the future performance of those magical functions, upon the proper discharge of which the safety of the people and even of the world is believed to hang. Thus, the rules in question fall under the head of the taboos, which we examined in an earlier part of this book. They are intended to preserve the life of the divine person, and with it, the life of his subjects and worshippers. Nowhere, it is thought, can his precious yet dangerous life be at once so safe and so harmless as when it is neither in heaven nor in earth, but as far as possible suspended between the two. Okay, that's it for that. Stay tuned for more. Tomorrow I'm going to be reading about the Easter fires. And all this is going to be covering blood, sacrifice, rituals, all that good stuff. So if you're interested and got a lot of questions on what it is you're keeping, the holidays, the holy days, the pagan holidays, if you're still doing that, I mean, either or, whatever it is, make sure you know what you're worshiping. With that, I'm gonna say shalom, good night, and like, share, and subscribe. Cash App, PayPal, Sister for Sisters. Shalom.